Today's conversation is about reclaiming the right of Black America to define ourselves on our own terms, not according to colonial frameworks, not according to nation-state logic, not according to standards designed to erase us. The nation-state is not ancient, it's not universal, it is a colonial invention. So today, we're going to talk about the emergence of the call within Black America to identify itself, to determine its destiny, right? So what am I talking about? So there is this cataclysmic moment happening across the globe. Everybody is kind of feeling, like this new era of coming of age. And in the United States, we're witnessing in real time the erasure of Black American contributions to American history. Those contributions are not anything insignificant. They consist of far more than just music and entertainment. They consist of contributions and watershed moments in medicine, physics, engineering, math, and are vital to some of the everyday oversimplified concepts within medicine, whether it's the creation of the ambulance or the reasoning behind the invention of the ambulance. The reason why I'm bringing all of this up is because Black Americans have come to sort of like a fork in the road of sorts. And it's become really clear, very clear, that Black Americans need to delineate themselves. We need to delineate and differentiate ourselves. I, for example, can come from the United States of America. I haven't been here for several generations, hundreds of years. Like my ancestry has been here before the United States was even a country. We are that old. We are in fact older than the United States. So we can't therefore go to Mozambique, for example, and tell the good people of Mozambique that we are now from Mozambique. We are Mozambican. I don't know if that's how you say it. I don't mean to sound ignorant, but we can't go to Sudan, for example, and say we are Sudanese or we are Tanzanian. We can't do it. They have a different history. They have different culture. They have different everything that makes them uniquely who they are. Everyone around the world respects that. The problem, though, is when it comes to Black Americans in the United States. And I'm not even talking about white folks for the most part. I'm talking about other African and Caribbean and Black folks from across the diaspora. They have a problem with Black Americans when we say, yo, this is a Black American tradition. These are Black American things. These are boundaries around Black America, right? This is sacred terrain. No difference than the terrain that is sacred amongst your people and their history and their cultures, etc. These are our sacred individuals. These are the people who gave up their lives, who risked their freedom, etc. You know what I mean? To help us establish who we are to the globe as a people, as a group of people, moving away from terms like African American and sort of, leaning into terms like Black American or foundational Black American, which has been taking a lot of heat. Right? These terms have been, especially foundational Black Americans, have been taking a lot of heat, and I understand why. But the premise of the term, whether we all decide to agree on that specific term or not, this is validity in it. That term is valid because what happens is, like I said, when people come into America and don't share our history, they have the chances and the opportunities to pick and choose when and how they want to be African American, and that's a problem for us. That's a problem for us, and it should be, and it shouldn't be tolerated. Just like it wouldn't be tolerated if I moved to another country and tried to reap the benefits, like through deception, to reap the benefits of that land that is really only geared and designed for the people of that land, whose people fought wars for that country and helped to build that country, and whose ancestors died fighting for that country, etc. So now we have a choice to whether we sit and endure this erasure and this sort of cultural and historical genocide of sorts. If we sit there with our hands folded and take it. So that's the genesis of this conversation that I want to have, right? And people want to try to make it seem like, like the idea of Black Americans, sort of reestablishing who we are is this sort of like fringe movement, like this, like as if we're a bunch of, you know what I mean? Like as if the idea is like, I don't know. I don't even understand. I don't understand why people, and it's I'm a lot of times talking about Black folks. I'm talking about some Black Americans amongst us, and then some of the thirsty, folks from the diaspora who try to downplay the fact that, no, this is Black American culture. We respect it just like you want us to respect your Puerto Rican flag or your Jamaican flag or your whatever flag you wave. You know what I'm saying? Just like you wave it in people's faces. You know what I'm saying? And I don't mean that like I'm not trying to be snarky or whatever, but I'm just saying, just like you want people to respect your culture, your customs, and your traditions, respect ours. I kept seeing people say, well, Black is just a color and it doesn't like you have to be named after a nation in order to get the rights of a nation. Like I heard some version of this, quite a bit. And so that's really essentially what I want to talk about. The idea that Black is just merely a color and that you have to be attached to what they call a nation or a state status. You have to have some sort of affiliation to a nation in order to be legitimized. And this is the thing that I really want to critique, because this is a problematic framing, because it sort of situates our reality as Black Americans within the confines or the construct of the nation state emblem or the nation state model. And the nation state emblem or the nation state model is a colonial construct. It is a construct of colonization that begins in the 17th or the 18th century, right? It's not a universal thing. It is a Eurocentric notion. The idea that your passport, your flag, or the border that separates a country from country, that these things, which are European inventions, to think that these are the things that we have to abide by in order to become legitimized is absolutely ludicrous, right? So, I mean, we're taught to believe that the nations are neutral, that they're ancient, and that they're the ultimate source of legitimacy. And in order to be real, you like I mentioned, you have to have these borders and it's international recognition and et cetera. And of course, you do want international recognition, but the idea that a flag or a passport, it hinges on it is really the issue I'm raising, because history tells us a different story, right? The modern state, like I mentioned, it's not timeless. It is a relatively recent invention, right? And it comes with the European expansion and the colonial conquest and the global ordering of people that started about 500 years ago. Not the nation state, but the global ordering of people that started about 500 years ago. And I'm talking about the global order as we see it today. Right. So people can go back and be like, oh, well, during the time of, Genghis Khan, they want to go back that far, or they want to go back to the Romans. And it's like, no, bro, like from this point, from the last 500 years, the global order as we know it today is the result of the last 500 years of European conquest. I'm making this argument as a rule, right? Of course, there are some exceptions to it. In the sense that, we can find exceptional aspects to that statement, but as a rule, this is what I'm standing on. So being asked to, identify according to this nation state ethic, what we need to recognize is that the nation state did more than just organize territory. Like the idea of the nation state went beyond just organizing territory. It also organized power. Right. The nation state, when we start to think in terms of the nation state, we need to understand that this is a Eurocentric concept based on the organization of power. And it decided who belongs, who didn't belong, who could govern, who could be displaced, and who could be erased. Whether intentional or unintentional, doesn't matter. The outcome is still the same: displacement and erasure. When we think about the ways in which the colonial borders carved up Africa, right? Indigenous nations were absorbed into settler states. Entire populations were racialized to to make European governance easier, right? So we see nation state borders that, like, over the last 200 years, you see it carved through borders, national borders, carved through historical tribes, cousins, brothers, and siblings in some instances, being divided by external factors, by European border markers. Sudan and Egypt, for example, right? I mean, other places as well. But like the south of Egypt and the northern Sudan, you drew a line between the Nubian people. And as a result, Nubia or Nubians don't have a nation. They're not a nation. They were one of the groups who were sort of marked for displacement or for erasure. So stay with me on this. Stay with me, because, remember, we're talking about Black America, and we're talking about Black America in the context of this nation state notion that Black is just a color and that you can't identify, your identity can't be based on a color. It has to be based on like a nation status. And what I'm doing is I'm troubling this whole idea of the ways in which we think of nation and historicizing it and where it came from and who benefits from it and who don't. So the nation state, it doesn't just govern the land, right? It governs the imagination. It governs how we think about ourselves, and we internalize that logic. So for example, we have folks who say, we can't be called Black American because, and then they go right to the right. So they kill the imagination that, we're Black Americans, or that we're foundational Black Americans, right? The nation state logic kills that imagination. And the logic that kills that imagination comes from the idea of legitimacy. That's a lot of times that's attached to a flag. It's attached to a passport, etc. And again, like these flags and these passports, these are all relatively new things. No one has really stopped to think about or take into account, like, where all this come from? Where did these, and I'm not sitting here trying to argue that we need to disband the notion of a nation state. I'm not saying that. I'm not necessarily saying that in this argument. But I mean it's not a bad idea given its history. It's not a bad idea to rethink it, to reimagine it, because of all of the displacement and all of the erasure that comes with it, and because of its origins, right? It is a colonial project. So, I mean, we can put that on the back burner, but what I'm simply saying is that this colonial logic, right? We don't just need to rely on it. We can name it and still, imagine for ourselves what works best for us and present that and stand on that and live by that, and not worry about or and feel a need for colonial logics to validate what we know to be true about us. And then the idea of the illegitimacy of naming ourselves Black because it is a quote unquote color rather than a nation. This argument, I think, it just misunderstands both history and identity. Like, to make this argument is just a fundamental misunderstanding of history, and it's a misunderstanding of what identity really is. Because Black is it's not a crayon color, right? It's not just it's a historical condition. It is a shared trajectory that's formed, in the case of the United States, through enslavement, through segregation, Jim Crow segregation, apartheid style segregation. I mean, the Great Migration period, resistance, the civil rights movement, and cultural continuity. Black Americans are not simply a racial category. We are a people that is shaped by a specific kind of history that is very local, that is within a certain border. And those borders are the United States of America, with a specific timeline, about a 400 to 500 year period, rooted in the southern states. This is Black America. This is Black American identity and Black American history. All right. So, and the idea that further, like the idea that the collective identities cannot be named in relation to Blackness, it falls apart under basic scrutiny. Like we just like, for example, the term Bilad Sudan. Bilad Sudan. What does that mean? The land of the blacks, or the country known as Sudan, the African country known as Sudan today. The term predates Sudan, right? It was referred to a vast region, swaths of people across regions in Africa. Is a collective, is recognition that black peoples have always, saw themselves as a collective presence, or looked at themselves as a collective presence in relationship to black. And, blackness has gotten a bad reputation only because of white supremacy. Let's be clear. Like, the black people who try to distance themselves from their blackness is only because of the myths and the scrutiny that white supremacy has placed on the idea of blackness, for no other reasons. People whose skin is like ultra black in different parts of the world, and then they come in contact with the Western world, and they want to. It's not that they want to differentiate themselves from being black, or from their skin being black, but from the notion of the meaning of what it means to be black that has been sold to them as a colonial logic. So you have people who come from African nations, who come from Caribbean nations, and they're blacker than black, right? But they will fight you about the fact that they're not black. And it's like, bro, I'm looking at you. Bro, you blacker than me? Like, what is this logic? What is this logic that people are fighting against? We know you're black. We looking right at you. So we have that. We have this, right? That we have to contend with. But the real issue, the deeper contradiction in this is the ways in which people claim to reject Eurocentrism and white supremacy, yet still hold on to the nation state logic, a colonial framework that determines identities and legitimacy. That's the big irony in all of this, right? People who claim to be pro-black, who claim to be, anti-white supremacy and against Eurocentrism and Afrocentric and Pan-Africanist. Yet some of these people are the ones who are still promoting, the nation state logic as a vehicle to determine legitimacy, right? And that's the thing that I really want to scrutinize here, because people have always existed beyond borders. And like, that's the thing that we need to know. Like, so I want to say it differently. People have always existed beyond borders, right? So what we call the Jewish identity predates Israel, right? People were Jewish before 1947, 1948, when the state of Israel, as we know it today, was created. Jewish people existed long before 1948, right? We know this. The Kurdish identity exists across multiple states. There are Kurds across, Iraq and Syria and different parts of that region. Indigenous nations exist despite colonial boundaries and borders. And again, like, as I mentioned, the Nubian people is probably, and what's interesting about the Nubians, this is one of the most ancient and one of the most glorious peoples on the earth. Their contribution to civilization is marvelous. These are people who predate the glorious Egyptian past, and they are significant players in Egyptian civilization. Like, when you go and visit Egypt and you see the ancient Egyptians, right? A big part of the ancient Egyptian lore and glory come from the Nubians, come from this group of black people. Let's be clear. Like, there's no ambiguity about the blackness of Nubians. And there's no ambiguity about the relationship between ancient Egypt and Nuba. There's no ambiguity there. But yet, and still, the Nubians were erased from the border or the nation state logic. They were, right? But Nubians still exist. They exist across multiple borders. You find them in southern Egypt. You find them in northern Sudan. You find them in Kenya. You find them in Ethiopia, right? They know exactly who they are. They can trace their lineage to Kush. It's some of the oldest, most ancient people on earth, and some of the blackest, most beautiful people. But I digress. This is not about Nubian history, but I'm just trying to explain the ways in which, identity is not beholden to nation state logics. That's the argument I'm making. And I'm giving a very good example of Nuba. And we can also talk about the word Ummah, the Muslim Ummah, right? What is the Muslim Ummah? The Muslim Ummah is not bound by any nation state logics. You find Muslims all over the world. And it's a brotherhood and a sisterhood of folks who have the same principles and pillars of living. They're not bound by any border. They're literally everywhere on earth. So the idea that the nation logic just falls apart, when you scrutinize it in this way, like Middle East or North Africa, these are also colonial terms. And we need to scrutinize why are these terms called that? Why is the Middle East? What is the Middle East? The middle of what? The middle between what points? It's the middle of what and where and how? How is this the middle? Who determined that it was the middle? We don't ask these questions. Well, I'll tell you, it was part of the British Empire's logic, colonial logic, that said because it positioned itself, the British Empire positioned itself as the base, as the core. And its main colony, India, the distance between the British Empire and India was from here to say here. And in the middle is the lands that we call today the Middle East. And this is why we call it that. This is a British Empire colonial logic, naming the Middle East, naming North Africa to differentiate North Africa from what they named Sub-Saharan Africa. But I digress. And so I'm saying that to say, as Black Americans, we can't get frazzled by the fact that nation state logics won't allow us to legitimately define ourselves as Black Americans or as foundational Black Americans or whatever we decide to call ourselves, right? We can't get frazzled by that. We can't allow these same Eurocentric, logics that has gotten us into the conditions that we find ourselves for the last, couple of centuries. We can't allow those same logics to determine our way out and our path forward. It's just simple math, right? The nation state is not ancient. It's not universal. It is a colonial invention. So when you tell Black Americans that we can't name ourselves Black American or foundational Black American, or we need to, name ourselves accordingly, whatever the hell that means. Really what it means is according to nation state logics. When you tell us that, you need to understand this about what you're asking of us. And especially those of us who are Black who are making this argument. And borders were drawn with rulers and not with consent. People drew borders, you know what I'm saying? Like they drew borders just based on a whim. These Europeans and their taxonomy, their systems of taxonomizing and categorizing people and groups is the audacity is literally without any bounds and boundaries. And we need to correct all of that. We need to correct all of these records. We've been taught that legitimacy comes from flags. And as Black Americans, we have a flag. We should wave it. Our ancestors, invested time in this flag. I mean, we should wave it. We should be proud of it, because we are a nation. I mean, we are in terms of, the way we think of nations today, right? We should just be mindful of its history, but we can claim to be a nation. The Black is a country. Black is a group. It is a group of people. It is a group within specific borders. You know what I'm saying? Whose culture and evolution and his history is based on a specific border, right? With a specific past and a specific lineage, right? Like very specific elements that define and describe us and make us who we are. And, the idea, like you cannot reject Eurocentrism. I'm talking about whether you're Pan-African or whether you're, whatever, the pro-black, whatever, form of, and I'm not taking a swipe at my brothers and sisters by no means, but I'm just saying, but this is a critique that I think is warranted. You cannot reject Eurocentrism while using its tools to invalidate people. You can't claim to reject Eurocentrism and white supremacy and then use its tools, in this case, the nation state logic, to tell Black Americans who want to call themselves Black that they can't do it using these Eurocentric tools. Like, you're using a Eurocentric logic to deny the identity of a people that you claim to be a part of. It's not gonna work. It's not working. It won't work like that. A nation doesn't grant identity. People do. We determine identity. We don't rely on a nation to determine our identity and who we are. Self-identification is not illegitimate. It's liberation. That's it for now, y'all. Peace.
Word up, quick to set it, don't wet it. Real niggas lick shots, peace, Connecticut. Yo, what up, yo? Time is running out, it's the real though. Let's connect politics,